What a way for Formula One to come back from the summer break. We saw another repeat winner that's not Max Verstappen and some pretty exciting battles up and down the grid. Let's talk about it. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're here to talk about what we saw at the Dutch Grand Prix here in 2024, the first round post-summer break, and it did not disappoint, with a little bit of sprinkling of some expectations of what we might see the rest of this year here in 2024. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We're going to talk about our race quick hits, our weekend winners and losers, and then we'll wrap things up by talking about how my predictions did that we did before the Grand Prix weekend began. But before we get started, if you haven't already, subscribe down below if you enjoy F1 or sim racing content. We do a little bit of both here on this channel, as well as leave a comment down below what you would give the Dutch Grand Prix out of 10. I'd love to see your guys' ratings. I know it always varies, race to race. I'm interested to see what this one pulls out for you guys. And as always, turn on notifications so you don't miss a single upload. But let's go ahead, let's jump on into this thing, get this party started with our race quick hits. Obviously, you have to start this one with the front of the grid. Lando Norris put it on pole position here for the Dutch Grand Prix before promptly losing the lead at literally the very lights out, and away we go. He got a terrible start, and Max led very easily into turn one. But that wasn't the story of the whole race, because Lando and that McLaren showed a lot of pace and looked to do very well on its tires, so eventually overtake Max Verstappen on track and pulled out an incredible 20-second gap to Max in P2 in this one. So Lando gets his second win of the year, as well as the second win of his career here in the Netherlands today. It was a very well-run race by Lando. I didn't look like he particularly was too worried about it one way or another, and ultimately coming home to finish, I believe, by the widest margin that we've seen by someone not Max Verstappen in a very, very long time. So McLaren looks like they came out of the summer break ready to fight for championships, and it looks like they managed to pull it off. If it hadn't been for Oscar Piastri getting stuck there in the beginning of the race and then there towards the middle, he ended up having to fight George Russell for a long time at the beginning as well, and then Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc later. Not Sainz, just Leclerc. Later on, it could have been potentially a double McLaren podium in this one. Ultimately, he wasn't able to get around the Ferrari, but nevertheless, they put a sizable dent into Red Bull's constructors' lead, and at this point, it looks inevitable that McLaren is going to overtake Red Bull by the end of the year and win a constructors' title. Moving on, it looks like we have to talk about Red Bull and their supposed and pretty apparent lack of tire control. Their tire wear seems to be very much out of control in this one. It doesn't seem too long ago that we were talking about the Red Bull basically looking like the tires were brand new at the end of a stint, rather than having run 20, 30, 40 laps depending on the stint. Now all of a sudden we're seeing Max Verstappen complaining about low grip a lot earlier or at all at this point. And so it's really coming into question what really did go on. There's a lot of rumors that were flying around about Red Bull being forced to remove a rear suspension component that supposedly would make it a lot better on tire wear. But now that it's supposedly gone, or allegedly, I still haven't seen confirmed sources on this, but allegedly it was forced to be removed. And ever since that, rumored point of the division point between before and after that supposed removal of that part, Red Bull has not looked nearly as dominant. And even up to now, it looks like McLaren very easily has the reins on the fastest car on the grid, and they are not looking back, as Red Bull all of a sudden is fighting for wins, and in cases like today, not doing very well at that. I think we need to give some props to Ferrari. I think they had a very good race weekend this weekend. They looked a little all over the place in terms of the practice sessions and qualifying. Carlos Sainz obviously having a gearbox issue early on in the weekend and really limited his running practice, thus leading into a poor qualifying result where he was knocked out in Q2. But Ferrari actually managed to pull it together during the race, put together a pretty solid strategy, and actually saw Charles Leclerc finish on the podium. So is this a little bit of a flash in the pan for Ferrari? I know they've been very all over the place in the last few rounds, and it'll be interesting to see if they can keep it up going into Monza next weekend. I don't know if you can go much further without mentioning Mercedes. They looked pretty rapid in practice sessions and had been running very, very well over the last few rounds, including, 2 out of the last 4 now races won by Lewis Hamilton. They looked very, very poised for another strong weekend here, but ultimately kind of fell back into the pack. A poor qualifying performance from Lewis Hamilton in Q2, getting knocked out. George ended up putting it towards the sharp end of the grid, but the two ultimately came together in the race as they always seem to do, and finishing well down the top 10. definitely going to be a weekend Mercedes wants to forget and move on and get back to how they were in Spa as well as Silverstone. And so will be interesting, and kind of like Ferrari, but the opposite way. It'll be interesting to see if Mercedes can kind of get back towards the the end of the grid that they want to be. They've been running very well, and it'll be interesting to see if they can pull themselves back up after a pretty disappointing return to F1 after the summer break. Only a couple of points here left in our race quick hits. We got to talk about how the fact that we had 20 finishers, no yellow flags, no safety cars, no retirements. Absolutely incredible running. We actually did manage to get to see some on-track battles, but without the peril of a safety car or even really yellow flags in this one, it definitely left us, I think, a little more wanting a little more. Thankfully, we did see some on-track action that helped keep it a little interesting, but I think we very much were running the risk of a pretty boring one. But at the same time, it's really incredible the reliability of these cars in this era, because man, to have no yellow flags, no DNFs, no safety cars, none of that. Man, that's incredible, really. And then last but not least, I think we need to continue to have an update on the divide between the top half of the grid and the bottom half of the grid. I think we're still seeing a pretty defined top and bottom of the F1 grid. You have the very top, like McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes. Then you have that weird like middle ground right now where they're kind of sometimes battling really well, sometimes not, and like the Aston Martin, even Alpine have kind of turned it around a little bit. And then you have sort of the lower mid area of your Haas's, your Williams, and your RBs, although RB has definitely taken a step back here recently and have not had quite the results they did at the beginning of the year. And then you have the very bottom of the grid, definitely Sauber, and I would actually probably put V-Carb down there in that one as well. They've not been running very well. Daniel ended up coming home and finishing decently, but still fairly well off the pace of points, and Yuki just had a bit of a stinker, unfortunately. So, guys, that wraps up our quick hits. Let's move on now to our weekend winners and losers. We will begin with our weekend winner. I mentioned them already, and I'm actually going to give this to Ferrari. I think a lot of people were kind of down and negative about Ferrari right now, especially with how they looked in the practice sessions. Not a lot of expectations going into the race, and I think they actually ended up pulling a bit of a blinder, having Charles Leclerc finish on the podium in P3 and Carlos Sainz finishing near the midpoint of the top 10. But at a circuit like Zandvoort, going from outside the top 10 to finishing well inside the points. Definitely a very well-run race by Ferrari. Strategy seemed to be on point, and the pace actually looked pretty good as well. Charles Leclerc was able to hold off the McLaren of Oscar Piastri for the majority of the final stint of this one to finish on the podium, and Carlos made his way through the field pretty aggressively as well. So, like I mentioned in the race quick hits, it'll be interesting to see if Ferrari can keep it up, but I have to give props to them when they do it right, because they ran a really well done Sunday, and hard to fault them for that. All right, let's talk about the not so good. We are going to go with our weekend loser. And this is one that I actually don't mention too much, and there's probably a reason for that. My weekend loser for the Dutch Grand Prix is Kick Sauber. Now, I don't normally mention Sauber very much, mainly because they don't really give us a whole lot to talk about. They are very, very obviously the worst car on the grid this year, and realistically, they never really do much to give us an opportunity to talk about them. But I think this one definitely it's worth mentioning, because not only did they finish P19 and 20 when you had an Alex Albon, Logan Sargent, even a Kevin Magnussen who started in the pit lane, finishing further up the order, granted not near the points, but further up the order, and you had your cars finishing P19 and P20, as well as the only two cars to finish 2 laps down. That is horrific, and I think I know they take a lot of flack, but for this one looks extra bad. And so I don't normally want to punch them, kick them while they're down, but at the same time, this was probably one of their worst results of the year, and it was left almost nothing to be desired, or left a lot to be desired rather, and left nothing basically in the positive. There's no real silver lining to this one, and I'm honestly just wondering where they're going to go from this, because there's a lot of teams who catch a lot of flack for not improving very much, but at the same time, Kick Sauber is absolutely nowhere, and I think they're very well deserving today of my weekend loser. All right, let's move on to it. Wrapping this thing up pretty quickly here, we're going to talk about my predictions results. I apologize, I'm going to look off in my notes here for a second. We're going to start off with my pick for biggest positive surprise. I went for Yuki Tsunoda. It just felt like we were due for a Yuki masterclass, and unfortunately, not the case. He didn't even end up beating his teammate in the race and finished well out of the points. And it was a tough sledding from there, as even his qualifying put him on the back foot, and it was going to be tough sledding to get a point in this one. So no points for me there. My biggest disappointment, Charles Leclerc. Probably got about as far away as possible, finishing on the podium. But early on in the weekend during practice sessions, it looked like we might have had an opportunity here. But Ferrari, like I said, ran a very good race. Charles back on the podium once again. Cannot fault him for that. So no points for me on that one. Looking at my qualifying top three, I predicted a Max Verstappen pole, a Carlos Sainz P2, and a George Russell P3. Now, George got very close. He ended up starting on the second row, but not in my top three, so no points there. Carlos Sainz, obviously getting knocked out in Q2 after a little running over the course of the practice sessions. And I predicted a pole position for Max Verstappen at his home race, but Lando put in an absolute worldie of a lap and ended up putting it on pole, and I didn't even have Lando in there. And so unfortunately, only half point out of three total there for my qualifying top three. Then moving ahead and looking at my race podium, I got a little better. I predicted a Max Verstappen win, a Lando Norris P2, and a Lewis Hamilton P3. Now, Lewis showed a lot of pace over the course of this one, but starting obviously, especially after his impeding penalty and qualifying, starting down there in, P14, it was not going to go well from there, and basically that was a lost point basically from the jump. And then obviously I flip-flopped Max Verstappen and Lando Norris basically from their actual results, so a total of 1 point for me there. So not looking too good. We're sitting on 1.5 points with one prediction to go. My one crazy prediction was that there would be a safety car in the final leg that would give us a very exciting battle for the finish. Obviously, 20 finishers, no yellow flags, no safety cars, no points for me. So we round out the weekend gaining 1.5 points. Definitely not one of my better weekends, and that is going to severely hurt us, as if we take a look at our current standings post Zandvoort race weekend, I now sit at 53 points on the year. The British with 49 points. Son of 40 takes the lead of our little championship here with a very solid 3.5 point weekend, now sitting on 55 points. F1 Inferno with 31.5, and Andrew bringing up the rear with 31. So we have some battles up and down the order here in our little predictions championship. Only 9 rounds to go, but that leaves one question remaining. What is next for Formula One? F1 heads to the Temple of Speed, Monza in Italy for Ferrari's home race. This is always one of my favorite weekends of the year, just based on the vibes of Monza. It looks like an insane race experience, and I can't wait to see it once again. It's going to be, I think we're going to see a lot of questions answered as of what's going to happen down the stretch here this year. Is Red Bull going to be able to claw it back? McLaren going to be able to keep it up? Or Ferrari and Mercedes going to make another charge to continue to try and battle towards race wins? I can't wait to see what happens. It is only a week away. Last year we saw a Verstappen, Perez, Sainz podium back when Red Bull was looking dominant as all get outs, but that leaves one question remaining. Who are we going to see on the podium this year? Let me know your predictions down below. My guys, that is going to wrap up our race recap video here in this one. F1 is back, and I'm so happy it is. I really enjoyed this one. It was very exciting, and man, it's so nice to have your weekends structured around an F1 weekend once again. And we're blessed again to have that happen here in just a few days, as F1 is back not but a week from now. If you're interested in jumping in our community predictions championship, you can head to the link down below, join the Discord, and leading up to every Grand Prix weekend, I'll make a call for predictions, the same ones we did here, and you're able to have your voices heard, as well as your predictions included in our predictions video that goes up in our race preview video. But guys, that is going to wrap it up for me here in this one. I hope you enjoyed the weekend. Subscribe if you haven't already, and like the video if you made it this far. That's going to wrap it up for me here, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.